Joining me now from the nation's capital is Athey, the White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. Amber, you're always appreciated on this show. So regarding this new development, I mean, it's a historic day, as we've heard time and time again from those in the media, another historic day. What are we looking forward to now? I mean, are we basically just waiting on the Senate rules? Is that the big thing that we should be keeping an eye on?
Right. So today, all of these senators were, of course, sworn in. What will happen next is the impeachment managers will actually make their arguments on the Senate floor. So you'll see these people appointed by Speaker Nancy Pelosi actually making their case for impeachment of the president. Now, this has been adjourned until January 21st, so we do have a short break until that process begins.
And regarding what type of trial we're expecting to see, I mean, in the past, we've heard some reports, actually. I think it was Ted Cruz that first brought up the idea of kind of a tit-for-tat type witness type thing. Like, you get to bring in John Bolton, we get to bring in Hunter Biden, something like that. But as of now, that's just reports. I believe it was Politico that was first reporting that. So we don't have anything definitive yet on the table. Do we have any inference of what kind of trial we're looking at, or is that still up in the air for the most part?
It's still up in the air. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has seemed to indicate that he does not want to call many witnesses, if any at all, primarily because if there is a witness who comes forward and says something damaging about the president that could lead people to believe that he could be impeached, it would make things much more difficult for Republican senators who are in potentially states that could flip in 2020. So he's not going to want to make this a difficult vote for anyone in his party. He wants this to be a very lockstep vote for Republicans.
And I think it's also worth mentioning, too, I mean, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, she delayed this process in hopes, I'm assuming, I think most people are assuming, that new evidence would surface, more damning information, you will, something that could really get the ball moving in a way that it didn't during the impeachment inquiry. In fact, a lot of people are now looking at the Lev Parnas allegations, saying that may be something that they were hoping for. But once again, we don't even know if that type of information will be allowed into trial. And a big part of that, too, comes back to Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts. He'll be overseeing, presiding is the word that they use, over this entire trial. Is there anything that we should be looking for regarding that, or is he basically going to have a pretty hands-off approach and kind of let the two sides kind of deal with this, kind of the same way that it has been in the past?
He's mainly there just to make sure that processes are followed correctly. He won't be stepping in too much, I imagine. To your point about Lev Parnas, Republican Senator from Maine, Susan Collins, actually brought up the fact that this was new evidence and questioned the fact that the Democrats rushed through their impeachment inquiry in the House and then held on to the articles before transmitting them to the Senate, hoping for new evidence to come out. When people pushed back on her, she said, isn't this just proof that you all rushed the process when trying to call forward witnesses because you knew that you didn't have enough evidence against Trump? So far, some of these tactics that Pelosi has been trying to use to make the Senate seem like it's not going through the impeachment process properly are actually backfiring on her.
And to that point, too, that kind of reminds me of back during the expert witnesses in the impeachment inquiry, of course, when they brought in those law professors, and the Republican expert witness during that whole process said that there is an obstruction here, but it's on Congress's part for that matter, because you're not letting this process play out in the courts. This was back when there was a court process going out, whether John Bolton would be forced to appear, forced to go through his subpoena, and his argument was essentially saying that if you don't allow it to play out in the courts, you're the ones who are kind of obstructing this process right now. So in a way, the rushing of this process does kind of seem like it's coming at a detriment for Democrats because, as you said, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said that no more information will be brought in. That was the job of the House, and now it's the job of the Senate to kind of carry out this trial, let it all play out. So acknowledging that point, too, have we heard any word from the White House whether or not they want this type of trial to be, as we said, with witnesses, or do they want it to be fast and kind of move on as well?
Well, that's a complicated issue because initially the president said that he did want to call witnesses, particularly his top three were Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and, of course, the whistleblower. But the White House is also amenable to letting Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell handle this process in whichever way he sees fit. They've seen him do a great job in the Senate in terms of making sure that Trump's judge nominees get confirmed and making sure that all of his policy proposals go through the Senate pretty smoothly. So they trust him to do this in a manner that's going to benefit the president and ultimately lead to either a dismissal or an acquittal.
And acknowledging that point, too, I think it's also very important to remember that this process, I mean, if it goes by the same timeline as the Bill Clinton impeachment trial, this will be about 5 weeks from this point, meaning that this is going to overlap with the Iowa caucus. And you've heard people on both sides of the aisle say that this comes to the detriment of some of the senators in this process who are running for president, most notably Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, but also Amy Klobuchar as well. So is there any inference of what these senators are planning to do, acknowledging that point, because they're going to have to go back and forth now between Iowa and then back to the Capitol in order to do their part as jurors in this whole process. Is this something that they've been okay with? Do they understand that this is part of their responsibilities as being lawmakers before they are presidential candidates?
Elizabeth Warren was actually asked about this during the last Democratic debate on CNN, and she went with the line that this was her constitutional duty to be there for the impeachment proceedings. But of course, it's hard to say whether or not they actually will stay in town when they have perhaps the most important part of their primary race ahead of them. If they do want to be president, it certainly would not be a good look for them to miss Iowa, which is a key battleground state. So it'll be very interesting to see what these senators actually decide to do when their potential candidacy is on the line.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot going on between now and this point. This trial starts next Tuesday, so they're going to have to make a decision pretty relatively quick. But Amber Athey, Washington correspondent from the Daily Caller, thank you very much for joining us tonight.